My name is Veronica. I was born with mild cerebral palsy due to a premature birth that could be best described as traumatic for both me and my mother, followed by developing significant hearing loss at 2 years old from a prolonged high fever, and I became a quadriplegic 7 years ago. Living in the information age, I'm surprised by the lack of practical and useful information for people with disabilities beyond clinical and WebMD-type websites, especially in the blogging and blogging arenas. I was like, seriously? As I searched high and low for any information from the perspective of another quadriplegic after I became one myself, to no avail. I was sent home after 5 months of extensive rehab, with no practical knowledge, not even a good luck. I and my team were left to figure out everything on our own. It is my goal to share what I've learned through a lot of trial and error, along with some blood, a lot of sweat, a few tears, and a mountain of humor. You truly need a lot of humor to deal with it all. Now a little about my history. I was born in a rural community in Appalachia in the late 1960s. To high school dropouts, there was very little that could be done for me. In fact, absolutely nothing was done for me because my parents had no insurance and I was sent home when I was 2 days old. If I had been born today, I would have surely remained in a NICU for at least the first couple of months of my life. I was so weak that I was fed with a medicine dropper and was also so jaundiced that I appeared orange for months. It is said that I fell into a coma when I was 4 days old and I woke up 9 days later. I wasn't hitting milestones until much older, and I kept the yellowish hue from jaundice until I was in my early teens. The doctors did not tell my parents about my diagnosis. The only reason they found out was when my father flipped through my file at an appointment when I was about 25 months old while waiting in the exam room and found that I had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 16 months of age, along with multiple notes about my failure to thrive. The doctors have known and they failed to inform my parents, and my parents had to look the diagnosis up in the dictionary. I was evaluated prior to my entering kindergarten and I was labeled as being retarded, probably due to my being non-verbal because I had a significant hearing loss that was undiagnosed at the time. I was funneled into the special education class in my district. Trust me, there was no education taking place in that classroom. It was complete and utter chaos. Luckily, my parents threatened to sue the school system when my hearing loss was discovered and I was quite bright. I was placed in a regular kindergarten for the rest of the school year. After getting hearing aids and speech therapy, I became verbal at 6 years old and I repeated kindergarten the next school year, making me the first student with disabilities in my district to be mainstreamed. I went from having an 80-word vocabulary to a third-grade level vocabulary in the space of 1 year with the help of my hearing aids and speech therapist. While growing up, there were always books available to me at home and I was taken to the library every week, and I would often ignore the kid books and checked out the books that were for older kids and adults. It was during a 4th grade reading assessment, it was discovered I was reading at a first-year college level. Seeing my mother with her nose always in a book set an example for me and my brothers. If I had a question, she'd tell me to look it up. I think because of this, I was often bored at school. I was given a hard time at school, by kids and teachers alike. Remember, this is 25 years before inclusive education became a thing. In fact, some teachers resented having me in their classrooms and I was moved out in the hall or sometimes was punished for distracting the other students when I did nothing wrong. The other students were the ones misbehaving by picking on me. I was gaining acceptance in primary school with the occasional kid making fun of the way I walked and talked. It wasn't so bad. When my parents divorced and my mother, brother, and I moved a few miles away and we would have to go to the schools in the nearby town. The new school had its challenges. They tried to force me into a remedial 5th grade class, mostly because they got more federal funding for remedial and special education students. Again, my mother said no, pointing out that I was reading my older brother's high school literature books and my standardized test scores put me at a much higher level across the board than what the remedial classes offered. In high school, I took nothing but core classes and attended summer classes so I could skip a grade and graduate early. After high school, I was given a choice by my mother the day after I graduated: get a job or go to college. To be honest, I was so focused on getting out of high school, I never gave much thought to what would come next. When a teacher and then a high school guidance counselor told me I could drop out of school at 16 and even encouraged me to do so, it made me determined to finish it, plus I knew my parents would not permit me to drop out. I was tired of school and I opted to find a job. But given the climate and attitude towards the disabled in my small community at that time, I think my mother knew I wouldn't be able to get a job. She encouraged me to put in applications, but no one would hire me due to the CP and speech issues. Unable to get a job, I reluctantly enrolled in my local community college that fall and loved it. While I still got stared at from time to time, I found more acceptance than I've had in my life at that point, especially with my instructors, and I was challenged academically too. George H.W. Bush had signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law about the time, and there was tons of money available for me. I got 4 degrees with a 3.2 grade average without paying a penny out of pocket. I moved to the southwest of the U.S. to continue my education and use it as a launchpad for future job prospects because I thought they'd have an enlightened attitude towards the disabled. While I found a higher degree of acceptance as I balanced classes, a work-study job, social life, and a volunteer job, I struggled to get a job for years, trying everything to get a foot in the door. It seemed all an employer saw was my disabilities and not my abilities. It was frustrating to see people with fewer qualifications get prime jobs. Eventually, I ended up volunteering as a means to get my foot in the door. One time I helped train a girl for a job I applied for and interviewed for. I stopped volunteering at that place when I understood that I was training the person for a job that I applied for. I kept at it until I got a job. Approximately 10 years ago I began to have tingling sensations in my hands and feet, with the occasional issue of not being able to lift my arms above my head. The doctors, not really understanding what CP was, blamed the CP for anything and everything. I had to educate them on what it was and was not. A few doctors even thought it was something I contracted, like measles or polio. I had to explain to them it was damage to motor control parts of the brain at birth. It left me frustrated, especially when I began having problems walking 7 years ago. They were convinced it was the CP and that I was overdoing it. I knew it wasn't the CP and something was seriously wrong, and I kept telling them that. I went from being able to hike, rock climb, and running 10Ks and half marathons to barely walking in the space of 6 months. My primary doctor didn't even seem the least bit concerned that I was falling quite regularly, too, and I fired him. Before I could get to an appointment to meet my new primary, I fell. I lost my balance and hit my head on the stove, and I found myself unable to move. Knowing the apartment complex's maintenance man's routine walk to his office, I watched the clock and started screaming for help about 10 minutes before he was due to walk by. He heard me and called the paramedics. Long story short, it turns out that I may have been walking around with a broken neck for over 20 years. In T994, I was hit by a car while riding my bike and was sent home after a trip to the emergency room showing just a few bumps, bruises, and road rash. The theory was that I had multiple microfractures that couldn't be detected in X-rays or CAT scans, that never healed and made worse over time from the spasticity of my muscles from the CP, gradually worsened until it started putting pressure on my vertebrae, causing the fractures to worsen and in turn, putting pressure on my spinal cord. Fast forward 22 years later, after that fall, I was a quadriplegic. There will be more to come about me, my surgeries, rehab, returning home, battles with insurance, home care agencies, caregivers, my emotional ups and downs, social life, sex life after becoming a quad, my current situation, and so much more. Life can be a pile of crap, so compost it, plant seeds in it, and grow something beautiful.